Today we will start with the endocrine system. This is until, when is that? May, until the end of the fourth monthly. Okay. And so this is quite a long topic. So I expect you to be reading ahead. Okay. Ahead of me. Body systems always work to maintain homeostasis. Two major regulatory systems of the body are the nervous and the endocrine system. Now you're done with the nervous system, right? With Dr. Mambulau and Dr. Rodonia. Now we will start with the endocrine system. Don't you worry, this is quite an easy topic. So they act together to coordinate functions of all body systems, the neuro and the endocrine. They act together. The nervous system, they have nerve impulses and they use neurotransmitters. The response is faster, briefer effects, and act on specific target organs. The endocrine system, on the other hand, uses hormones as mediator molecules. They are released in one part of the body, but regulate activity of cells in the other parts of the body. The response is slower, effects last longer, and they have broader influence as compared to the nervous system. The nervous system is more specific. And so this one, the neuron conducts impulses and then uses neurotransmitter, and the neurotransmitter is released into the synapses, then postsynaptic cell response, okay? In the endocrine, the glandular cells release hormones into the bloodstream and goes to particular target cells and where receptors are found to respond to that particular cell. The target cells has receptors, just like a key and lock, system, very specific. And they respond to these particular hormones. They have no effect on other cells, except on target cells only. Even if they are neighbors, for example. The nervous system and endocrine systems compared. The cells in the nervous system are the neurons. In the endocrine system, they are glandular epithelium. And the chemical signal of the nervous system are neurotransmitters, endocrine system hormones. The specificity of action in the nervous system, they have receptors on postsynaptic cell. while that of the endocrine, they have receptors on target cell. Speed of onset in the nervous system is very fast, within seconds, while that of the endocrine system from seconds to hours, sometimes even days. Duration of action with the nervous system is very brief unless neuronal activity continues. In the endocrine system, may be brief or may last for days, even if the secretion ceases. The nervous system exerts point-to-point control through the nerves, similar to sending messages via the intercom. Nervous control is electrical in nature and very fast. While that of the endocrine, the endocrine system broadcasts its hormonal messages to essentially all cells by secretion into the blood and the extracellular fluid. It's like a radio broadcast. It requires a receptor to get the message in. In the case of the endocrine messages, cells must bear a receptor for the hormone to be received and to exert its effect. If there is no receptor, no effect. Now, homeostasis. The endocrine system, one of the body's two major regulatory systems, secretes hormones that act on their target cells to regulate the blood concentration of nucleus, the nutrients, the water, salt, and other electrolytes, among other homeostatic activities. Hormones also play a key role in controlling growth and reproduction and in stress adaptation. Growth, reproduction, stress adaptation. Homeostasis is essential for the survival of the cells. The cells need a constant supply of nutrients to support their energy generating chemical reaction. Normal cell function also depends on or proper balance of the water and various electrolytes. So, cells make up the body systems, and it affects your endocrine system. These are your endocrine cells, organs. Thus, homeostasis is maintained. General principles of endocrinology. The endocrine system consists of the ductless. Remember that they are ductless glands that are scattered throughout the body. The endocrine glands are not connected anatomically. They constitute a system in a functional sense. They secrete hormones into the blood. When secreted, a hormone travels in the blood to its distant target cells where it regulates or directs a particular function. Thus, endocrinology is the study of the homeostatic chemical adjustments and other activities that the hormones accomplish. A cell is a target because it has a specific receptor for the hormone. Most hormones circulate in the blood, coming into contact with essentially all cells. However, a given hormone usually affects only a limited number of cells, which are called target cells. A target cell responds to a hormone because it bears receptors for the hormone, for that particular hormone. If that target cell doesn't have, even if they have receptors, but it is not for that particular hormone, it doesn't respond. Okay. So, for example, target cell for hormone A has receptors for hormone A. Target cell for hormone B has receptors for hormone B. Sometimes they have target cells for both hormones A and B. So, for example, the gland has a hormone and it targets particular organs, okay? Like the bone, the liver, the kidney. And then, for example, protein hormone. It attaches on the receptors found on the cell membrane, okay? And for example, it activates adenosine triphosphate and turn it into cyclic AMP. So, and then this will take its effect. The steroid hormones, the receptors are not found on the cell membrane. They are found on the nucleus, for example. And then they stimulate protein synthesis. Determinants of the hormone concentration at the target cell. One is the rate of synthesis and secretion of the hormone. The faster there is a rate, the faster is the rate of synthesis. Of course, the more hormones will find its way into the target cell. That is faster rate of synthesis and secretion. But if there is faster increased rate of synthesis, but the secretion is slow, then the concentration of the hormone in the target cell is affected. Usually only a small amount will find its way into the target cell. Proximity of the target cell to the hormone, to the source of the hormone. If the nearer, the better, right? So the nearer the target cell, the more hormones will find its way into from the source to the target cell, because it's only very near. There is no dilution effect. If it is farther, then dilution can take place, so decrease. Kita ka? Yes. Paso. Excuse me, among helper. Paso. Proximity of the target cell to the hormone source. The farther there is dilution, so the lesser amount of the hormone will find its way into the target cell. Okay? Dissociation constant of hormone with specific plasma transport protein, if there is any. Because there are hormones that doesn't use transport proteins. Others maglalakad lang. Others need wheels, okay? So that their delivery is faster. But if their dissociation constant is not fast enough, then only lesser amount of the hormone will find its way and will act on the target cell. Okay. Conversion of inactive or suboptimally active forms of the hormone into the fully active form will also determine the concentration of the hormone at the target cell, because there are hormones that are delivered into the target cell half-baked, and then it will be fully activated once it finds its way into the target cell, once it binds into the receptor. There are hormones like that. Just like your T4 will be converted to your T3 in the peripheral tissues. Thyroid hormone. Rate of clearance from the plasma by other tissues or by digestion or metabolism or excretion. The rate of clearance will determine the concentration of the hormone in the target cell. If the clearance is faster, of course, the amount of hormone that will be in the target cell on the receptors will be lesser. Or if there is digestion, or if the metabolism is faster, so lesser amount of hormone, the concentration of the hormone in the target cell is lesser. Or if excretion is faster or slow, it depends. Faster, lesser amount of concentration remains in the target cell. If metabolism or excretion or clearance from the plasma is lesser, slower, then the amount of hormone in the target cell is increased. And so faster action takes place. Determinants of target cell response. The number of molecules of the hormone, the relative activity and state of occupancy of specific receptors on the plasma membrane or in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. Of course, if you have the more molecules, the more relative activity. And if more receptors are occupied by the hormones, then response is faster. Even if the receptor is found in the plasma membrane or in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. Metabolism of the hormone in the target cell will also determine the response to that particular hormone, whether there is activation of the organ or inactivation. Usually, if there is already too much of the hormone, then inactivation will take place. Presence of other factors within the cell that are necessary for the hormone response. If you have other factors needed, if they are present, then response is faster. But for example, the cells of that particular organ has toxins binding on the receptors. So, of course, the hormones cannot bind 100%. So, response is so what do you do to correct that? You have to detoxify the patient. No? How do you detoxify? There are many ways to detoxify the patient. And usually, natural way to do that. For example, you have plenty of other drugs. You know, if you use antibiotics, it's not all of the molecules of the antibiotics that you use to overcome the infection. Some is filtered out of the body. That's another thing, and another way of detoxification. In this one here, presence of other factors, you can also detoxify the particular organ. Up or down regulation of the receptor consequent to the interaction with the ligand. Yes. Binding of the hormone to the receptor will produce an interaction. So it depends or whether this hormone is an activator or an inhibitor to that particular organ. Okay, so there is up regulation or down regulation of the receptor. It depends on the ligand. The one that binds into the receptor. Post-receptor desensitization of the cell, including down regulation of the receptor. Once the hormone binds into the receptor, it will some hormones will inactivate the receptor. So thus decreasing the action of the gland, okay, of the endocrine gland. So that is down regulation, action of the receptor, down regulation of the receptor. So overview of hormones. Hormone is a chemical substance that is secreted into the internal body fluids by one cell or a group of cells that has a physiological control effect on other cells of the body. What are they? Chemical messengers secreted by specialized cells from isolated endocrine cells, which makes up the diffuse endocrine system. Chemical messengers secreted by specialized cells from neurons. Chemical messengers secreted by specialized cells from immune system cells producing cytokines. Your cytokines, if there's a cytokine storm, that there is inflammation, right? Neurons also produce chemical messengers, just like your posterior pituitary. Where do they go? The hormones, most into the blood. Others go into the environment, just like your pheromones of the animals, ectohormones or pheromones, just like, for example, in the dogs. You will wonder why sometimes if your dog, for example, if you have a dog in the house and then it's a female, you will just wonder why the male dogs can find your female dog, even if your female dog is inside your house. See, it's because of the pheromones that is emitted into the environment. And so that's why many male dogs will go to your gate, because they felt the effects of the pheromones, and their target is your female dog. That is in heat. Hormones regulate existing fundamental bodily processes, but they do not initiate cellular reactions de novo by themselves. They serve no nutritive role in responsive tissues. They are not incorporated as a structural moiety into another molecule. Types of hormones. According to the distance the hormone travel, it is considered endocrine if it is very far. You have your paracrine, autocrine, intracrine. Paracrine if it's quite near, right? Autocrine if the receptors are found within the same cell and the action will also take place there. Sorry. According to solubility, you have hydrophilic and lipophilic. When you say philic, lover, right? Lover of water, hydrophilic, lipophilic, lover of fat. Okay, so hydrophilic example are your peptide hormones. Lipophilic are your steroid and thyroid hormones. Circulating, they circulate in the blood throughout the body. They are the local hormones, they act locally. Your endocrine cells, for example, they secrete hormone and it goes into the circulation and find its way into the distant target cells, while the local hormones act locally. You have your paracrine, act on neighboring cells, and you have your autocrine, act on the same cell that secreted them. These are called local hormones. How do hormones get from point A to B? To be classified as endocrine hormone and not a paracrine or autocrine hormone, it has to travel in the blood and require water-soluble transport mechanism if hormone is lipid-soluble. Hormones act by binding to receptor on target cells. Hormones have to have a mechanism for ending the effect. One is stop or reduce production of the hormone, then degrade the hormone. Another is enzymatic removal from the receptor or endocytosis of the receptor hormone complex. Endocytosis, remember this term, going inside, eaten up, okay? Endocrine hormones are mainly classified by source and structure. For example, like this. Your hormones is all over the body, right? Here is the key. If it is G, it means gland. C, endocrine cells, neurons. P, peptide. S, steroid, and A, amino acid derived. No. You have your pineal gland, hypothalamus, your posterior pituitary and anterior pituitary, and you have your thyroid in the neck. Then you have your parathyroid and you have your thymus. Then you have your heart. You have endocrine glands in your heart and in the liver. For example, in your pineal gland produces melatonin. And primary targets of your melatonin is the brain and other tissues. The main effect is circadian rhythm. It has to do with your sleep and immune function. And it is also found to be an antioxidant. That's why it is important for COVID, your melatonin. One of your preventive therapy, one of your preventive hormone that you will take is melatonin for COVID, because it has its effect on the immune function, aside from the circadian rhythm. So many are using melatonin for prevention of your COVID. In the hypothalamus, you have your trophic hormones, and this acts on the anterior pituitary to release or inhibit pituitary hormones, while your posterior pituitary, this is an example of a neuron, okay? I mentioned earlier that neurons can also produce hormones. So posterior pituitary has oxytocin and vasopressin, but this is from the hypothalamus and find its way into the posterior pituitary. The target is your breast and the uterus for your oxytocin, for your milk ejection and labor and delivery at the end of pregnancy. It has also something to do with behavior. Your vasopressin is antidiuretic. It acts on the kidney for increased water reabsorption, okay? Then anterior pituitary has plenty of hormones. You have your prolactin, growth hormone, corticotropin, thyrotropin, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormones. Prolactin acts on the breast, growth hormone on the liver and in many tissues of the body. Corticotropin from the adrenal cortex has many functions. Thyrotropin stimulates the thyroid hormone. And your follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone acts on the gonads. Growth hormone, for example, your prolactin is for milk production. Growth hormone is for growth of the individual and acts on the liver and many tissues. Increase metabolism when there is growth. Your corticotropin, the adrenal, from the adrenal cortex, it is to correct the level of the cortisol release, regulate. Thyrotropin, the target is thyroid hormone for the synthesis of the thyroid hormone, T3 and T4. Follicle stimulating hormone, it acts on the egg or sperm production and the sex hormone production, like your LH, FSH and LH, sex hormone production, egg or sperm production. Your thyroid produces your T3 and T4. T3 is the more active, the active form. It acts on many tissues to increase metabolism, growth, and development. It also produces your calcitonin and acts on the bone to increase the plasma calcium levels, although it has minimal effect on humans. Your parathyroid hormone, its target is the bone and the kidney. It has something to do with plasma regulation of calcium and phosphate levels. Then your thymus, you have thymosin. Action is on the lymphocytes and for development of lymphocytes. Then your heart, it has atrial natriuretic peptide and acts on the kidneys to increase sodium excretion. Angiotensinogen from the liver and your insulin-like growth factor. They exert effect on the adrenal cortex and the blood vessels for growth and increases your blood pressure. Okay. Other hormones include in the stomach, you have your gastrin, cholecystokinin, and your secretin, right? You have already taken this up. Primary targets are the GI tracts and the pancreas. Main effect is assist in digestion and absorption of nutrients. In the pancreas, you have your insulin, glucagon, your somatostatin, pancreatic polypeptide, and it affects many tissues for metabolism of glucose and other nutrients. Adrenal cortex, you have your aldosterone, cortisol, and your androgens. Aldosterone acts on the kidneys. Cortisol acts on many tissues and also your androgens. Aldosterone is for sodium and potassium homeostasis, while your cortisol is for stress response. This helps you in your flight or fight. In your decision, when there is stress, this cortisol helps you to decide whether you will get away from that stressful situation or you will fight, fight or flight. So stress response, your androgens for sex drive in the female. Your adrenal medulla, you have already taken this up. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. It acts on the tissues. Fight or flight response also. adrenal and the kidney, you have your erythropoietin and 1,25 dihydrocholecalciferol. This is your vitamin D3. It acts on the intestine, increases calcium absorption. And it has been found lately that it will also play a role in the immune system. That's why they are encouraging patients to take in vitamin D3 for COVID. Adrenal skin, you have your vitamin D3, intermediate form of hormone. And the precursor is 1,25 hydroxycholecalciferol. Testes, you have your androgens and you have your inhibin, and it acts on many tissues. Sperm production and for development of secondary sex characteristics. Inhibin inhibits FSH secretion. Ovarian, you have your estrogen, your inhibin, and your relaxin for during pregnancy to deliver the baby. Estrogen, it acts on the many tissues for egg production and development of the secondary sex characteristics of the female. Inhibin inhibits FSH secretion also. It acts on the anterior pituitary, the inhibin. Relaxin relaxes the uterine muscles to allow delivery of the term baby, fetus. Adipose tissue, it has leptin, adiponectin, and resistin. Target hypothalamus and other tissues. There's something to do with food intake, metabolism, and reproduction. Placenta, pregnant female only. It produces estrogen, progesterone, and chorionic somatomamotrophin, and chorionic gonadotrophin. It acts on many tissues, for fetal and maternal development. Your estrogen and progesterone. Your chorionic somatomamotrophin is for metabolism, and your chorionic gonadotrophin, corpus luteum, for hormone secretion. These things will be discussed in detail as we go along discussing the individual hormones. So hormones can be classified by its mechanism of action. One is hormones that bind to intracellular receptors. You have your androgens, calcitriol, estrogens, glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, your progestins, retinoic acid, thyroid hormones. Another, hormones that bind to cell surface receptors. First, hormones that bind to intracellular receptors, okay? Another classification is hormones that bind to cell surface receptors. They are mostly peptides. And one of that, the second messenger is cyclic AMP. There are a lot of them. Marami ito sila. That stimulates, that uses cyclic AMP as second messenger. Now you might get confused with your TSH. Do not get confused with your thyroid stimulating hormone, okay? Because this acts on the anterior pituitary. This is not a steroid. This is a peptide. Most of the hormones that bind to cell surface receptors are peptides. You have examples are these. These are the hormones that bind to cell surface receptors and uses cyclic AMP as its second messenger. You have your alpha-2 adrenergic catecholamines, beta adrenergic catecholamines, adrenocorticotropic, antidiuretic hormone, calcitonin, chorionic gonadotropin, corticotropin releasing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone. You have your glucagon, lipotropin, luteinizing hormone, melanocyte stimulating hormone, parathyroid hormone, somatostatin, and thyroid stimulating hormone. A lot to memorize, right? But huwag kayong mabahala. This madali lang ito. We will take this up one by one as we go through the different endocrine glands. Huwag lang kayo, do not get overwhelmed. Relax lang kayo dyan. Okay. Another classification by mechanism of action is the hormones that uses cyclic GMP as its second messenger. You have your atrial natriuretic factor from the heart and the nitric oxide. Then another classification, another class of hormones that uses second messenger is calcium, or that uses calcium as its second messenger, or phosphatidylinositols, or both. Now you have your acetylcholine, alpha-1 adrenergic catecholamines, angiotensin 2, cholecystokinin, gastrin, gonadotropin releasing hormone, oxytocin, platelet-derived growth factor, substance P, and thyrotropin releasing hormone. Then another, its second messenger is a kinase or a phosphatase cascade. You have your adenopectin, adiponectin, chorionic somatomamotropin, epidermal growth factor, erythropoietin, fibroblast growth factor, growth hormone, insulin, insulin-like growth factor 1 and 2. You have your leptin, nerve growth factor, platelet-derived growth factor, and your prolactin. Their second messenger is a kinase or a phosphatase cascade. Kinase or phosphatase. If we classify, there is another way to classify hormones by its structure. It could either be a peptide or protein-derived or steroid hormones, or amino acid tyrosine-based hormones. The amino acid involved is tyrosine, derived from tyrosine, such as your catecholamines or your thyroid hormones. So the type of compound, for example, amines formed from amino acids. Example, norepinephrine and epinephrine. From, for example, peptides, your peptides hormones that acts on your anterior pituitary, they are formed from amino acids, as well as your protein hormones. They are derived from amino acids. Example is your parathyroid hormone, growth hormone, and your prolactin. Your peptides, you have your antidiuretic, and I forgot this, thyroid releasing hormone, somatostatin, gonadotropin releasing hormone. You have your epinephrine and norepinephrine, your amines, peptides, and proteins. And you have also your glycoprotein hormones, derived from protein and carbohydrate, FSH, LH, and TSH. You have your steroids, formed from cholesterol. Examples are your testosterone, estrogen, your aldosterone, and your cortisol. They are steroids. Your peptide hormones. It is the classification that includes most hormones. Usually they are the ones that affects the anterior pituitary. If a hormone is not a steroid or an amino acid derived hormone, then it is a protein or peptide hormone. Why? Concerns with these hormones: how they are made, stored, and released, how they are transported in the blood, and its mechanism of action, and how long they last. So these are the things that you have to remember in a hormone. How are they made? How are they stored? Vesicles or stored as is? How are they released from storage? Okay, and when they are transported in the blood, how are they transported? Are they transported as do they swim freely, or do they need a vehicle or a speedboat? Okay, a vehicle to transport from the endocrine gland towards the target tissue. Okay, some they don't need transportation. Some, especially the steroid hormones, they need transportation. The mechanism of action, you have to remember the mechanism of action of that particular hormone. And you have to remember whether they are long-lasting, short-acting, or long-acting, fast-acting, short-acting, or long-acting. You have to remember this. So these are your concerns with these hormones. You have to remember that, okay? Now, how are they made, your peptide hormones? How are they synthesized, stored, and released? For example, messenger RNA on their ribosomes binds to amino acids into a peptide chain called a pre-pro hormone. The chain is directed into the endoplasmic reticulum lumen by a signal sequence of amino acids. Then the enzymes in the endoplasmic reticulum will chop off the pre part of the pre-pro hormone, okay? So what will remain is now the pro hormone. The pro hormone passes from the endoplasmic reticulum through the Golgi complex. This is being processed here in the Golgi complex. And so the secretory vesicles containing the enzymes and pro-hormone bud off the Golgi. Okay. Teka. Yeah. Sorry for the interruptions. Secretory vesicles containing enzymes and your prohormone, they will separate, go out from the Golgi apparatus. How? They will bud off, sort of, it will protrude. They will protrude from the Golgi apparatus. And the enzymes will chop off the prohormone into one or more active peptides, plus additional peptide fragments. And they will package that into a secretory vesicle. Okay, so it will stand by here near the surface of the plasma membrane, of the cell membrane, okay? And it will stand by there, ready for release. Once there is a need for the hormone is released into the blood, passing through the extracellular fluid and then into the blood vessel, into the capillary, and it will be transported by the blood towards the target tissue, okay? Example is your insulin. Thyrotropin, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. It is a pre-pro hormone, processed to hormone plus other peptides plus signal sequence. For example, it is a pre-pro hormone, no? Then it is processed and then it will become a hormone plus other peptides plus signal sequence, and then is released into the blood. pre-pro TRH, thyroid releasing hormone, from the hypothalamus. Then this will be processed and cut off into 3 amino acids, for example, plus signal sequence. So only prohormone will go out of the Golgi apparatus. Prohormones may contain several peptide sequences that have biological activity. Prohormone processes to active hormone plus other peptide fragments. For example, your pro-opiomelanocortin. This is a process from pro opiomelanocortin. Then, after processing, this will be cut off, and it will produce your adrenocorticotropic hormone, your gamma lipotropin, your beta endorphin, okay, plus the fragment. Out of the pro-opiomelanocortin, these 3 hormones are produced. In case of your insulin, this is produced as pro-insulin. And this is folded back. These are amino acid chains, okay? Insulin and C-peptide chain. Upon activation of the insulin, this will be cut off. So this is the active form already. And the C-peptide that connects the 2 chains is released from the insulin chain. Okay. What else? Characteristics of peptide hormones: produced and processed by the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex of the endocrine cell. Produced and processed by the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex of the endocrine cells. Stored in secretory vesicles until signaled for release by exocytosis. Circulate in the blood, largely dissolve in the plasma, your peptide hormones. That means they swim freely. They don't need speedboats, okay? They swim freely. All they need are swimming trunks and a bikini, okay? Because they swim freely. Peptide hormones bind with surface membrane receptors upon reaching their target cells. They don't go inside the cell right away. They bind on the cell surface. The receptors are there. Act primarily through second messenger pathways to alter the activity of pre-existing proteins, such as your enzymes, to produce their physiologic response. Okay. The peptide molecule prepared first is usually a large precursor called pre-prohormone, and it is cut off to form your prohormone. And further cleavage of the prohormone will produce the final mature hormone, okay? Pre-prohormone to prohormone to active further cleavage to active hormone. Okay, that's the characteristic of your peptide hormones. Example is your pre-pro-insulin to pro-insulin to insulin. Okay, this hormone is stored in vesicles of the endocrine glands, the endocrine cells, yeah, and released on demand. When do you demand? When do you need insulin? When you have high blood sugar, okay? You need insulin for sugar to get inside the cell. If you don't have insulin anymore, then you are a diabetic. So what do? If your diabetes is far advanced, so you need to have injectable insulin. But nowadays, you can already correct that without injecting insulin through your stem cell. Stem cells there are already oral stem cells nowadays, and they have regenerative properties. So we don't need to worry too much on insulin injection anymore, because it can correct the pancreas. What is this? This one. From the blood, the hormone will bind to its receptor to activate G protein, which activates adenylate cyclase. These are your peptide. And these are the receptors. Inside, you have your adenylate cyclase. Teka, excuse me. Yeah. Okay. Your ATP upon the action of your adenylate cyclase will be converted to cyclic AMP. And this, your second cyclic AMP, is your second messenger. This cyclic AMP converts the protein kinases into activated protein kinases. The activated adenylate cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP, okay? And then it activates the cyclic AMP, converts the protein kinases into activated protein kinases. So the second cyclic AMP serves as the second messenger to activate protein kinases. These activated protein kinases will phosphorylate. Diba? When you phosphorylate, that is activation. Dephosphorylation is deactivation. When you phosphorylate, you activate. So your activated protein kinases will utilize ATP to activate a protein, okay? The activated protein kinases phosphorylate cellular proteins. And then, yeah, yun na nga. Because it is being phosphorylated, the protein. So it is being activated. Millions of phosphorylated protein cause reactions that produce physiological response. Okay? Gets nyo? Madali lang, no? Just remember the adenylate cyclase from the cell membrane. Okay? You already know the G proteins, right? You had that in biochemistry. So, steroid hormones include your progestins, your progesterone, your mineralocorticoids from the adrenal cortex, glucocorticoids from the adrenal cortex, androgens from the gonads, estrogens, and your vitamin D. It is made by the adrenal cortex, ovaries, testes, and placenta, your steroid hormones. Is derived from cholesterol. The one we were discussing kanina was peptide hormones. Now this one is steroid hormones, made by the adrenal cortex, ovaries, testes, and placenta, derived from cholesterol. They have a cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrin ring, or its derivative. This is your cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrin ring. Cholesterol is the parent compound of all steroid hormones. So actually, you don't have to be afraid with cholesterol, because cholesterol is needed to manufacture, to synthesize steroid hormones, right? It is the excess cholesterol that is not good, because cholesterol will also maintain the integrity of the cell membrane, right? We need proper amount of cholesterol for the cell membranes to be strengthened, because low levels of cholesterol will also make the cell membranes pliant and loosen the cell membranes, and toxins can get inside the cells if we have low cholesterol. So actually, cholesterol is needed to maintain the integrity of the plasma membranes, okay? So this is your cholesterol. Cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrin ring. There, 5 rings, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. How? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whereas this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. These are modified by enzymes. to make steroid hormones. Usually it is this tail, this excess, this tail that is being modified in the synthesis of these hormones. Just like this one in the adrenal cortex. From the adrenal cortex, you have your aldosterone. Now you try to see your excess carbon chain is being modified with your aldosterone, okay? With cortisol, this is also modified. You notice there is an OH hydroxyl group that is being added. And this is converted to your CH2. Your estrogen, your estradiol looks different already, okay? But the basic structure is still there, okay? So, yun. Action of your steroid hormone. They need speedboats, carrier proteins, going to the target area. So this is your steroid riding on the protein carrier, okay? So upon reaching the target area, it is being released. But the difference from the peptide is that it will go directly into the inside of the cell, into the nuclear receptor right away, and some will have cytoplasmic receptors. But lately, some steroid hormones have been found to have membrane receptors that use second messenger systems to create rapid cellular responses. So you have your cytoplasmic receptors, and then the hormone and the receptor will go inside the nucleus and binds into the DNA. The receptor hormone complex binds to the DNA and activates or represses. It is either an activator or repressor of one or more genes. So transcription produces messenger RNA, okay? And this mRNA, the activated genes produces new mRNA. And these are transported back to the cytoplasm for translation. Translation produces, okay, ano ba yan? Produces new proteins for cell processes, okay? Then this will, for example, be brought into the endoplasmic reticulum, like that. That is the difference with the peptide, okay? They will go directly either to the cytoplasm or into the nucleus. And they need vehicles, they need speedboats. Steroidogenic, steroid producing organs, steroidogenic organs specialize in the type of hormones they produce, because each of these organs has the enzymes necessary to produce only one or several, not all, of the steroid hormones. Steroid hormones act primarily by activating genes on binding with the receptor inside the cell, thus bringing about formation of new proteins. Okay, and these new proteins are the ones that carry out the desired response. Okay, secretion is by simple diffusion. Lipophilic hormones are largely bound to plasma proteins. Your steroid hormones are lipophilic. They love fat, okay? You have your lipid-soluble hormone will diffuse into the cells, okay? And then activated receptor hormone complex alters gene expression. Then newly formed messenger RNA directs synthesis of specific proteins on ribosomes. And the new protein is produced. This new protein alters, alters protein cell activity. Okay, so far, anyway, I will give out this one, the slides, so that you can study. Medyo mahaba-haba itong introduction of endocrinology, but actually, very easy lang siya. Basta lang, you just sort of, because there's a story to it, right? So, ganun. Synthesized by a unique characteristics of lipophilic thyroid hormone is different, synthesized by a unique pathway within the thyroid gland, but functions at its target cells by means similar to those used by lipophilic steroids. Amino acid derived hormones may be derived from tyrosine. So if it is from tyrosine, it produces T3 and T4, and epinephrine and norepinephrine. Remember that. You have to remember that. So this is your tyrosine. This one. And this is your catecholamine. This is your dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine, okay? You have a methyl group here with your epinephrine. And more or less the same, except for this one methyl group. Dopamine this one, the difference from dopamine and norepinephrine. The hydrogen will become a hydroxyl group here, okay? And your thyroid hormone, dalawa, because you have two, MIT and this is your T4, okay? Tetraiodothyronine, one 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is triiodothyronine. You only have 3 iodine. 1, 2, 3. And this is the active form of your thyroid hormone. More active than your T4. Okay? Teka. How about from tryptophan? You have your serotonin and your melatonin. Tryptophan. Amino acid, huh? Amino acid tryptophan. What time is it?
It's 11:49 na po, Doc.
That's right. Malapit na tayo matapos. Hormones from amino acids derived from tryptophan. You have melatonin and your serotonin. Serotonin is classified as a neurohormone as it is synthesized and secreted by the neurons of the GI tract for regulation of motility and central nervous system regulation. Your serotonin. This is your hormone involved in depression. Overall functions of the endocrine system. It regulates organic metabolism and water and electrolyte balance. Induce adaptive changes to help the body cope with stressful situations. It promotes smooth, sequential growth and development. It controls reproduction. Regulate red blood cell production, your erythropoietin in your kidney, along with the autonomic nervous system, control and integrative activities of both the circulatory and digestive systems. Your gastrin, you know, complexity of your endocrine function. A single endocrine gland may produce multiple hormones, like your anterior pituitary. A single hormone may be secreted by more than one endocrine gland. For example, both the hypothalamus and pancreas secrete the hormone somatostatin. Frequently, a single hormone has more than one type of target cell. Example, your vasopressin. The rate of secretion of some hormones varies considerably over the course of time in a cyclic pattern. The rate of secretion of some hormones, yes, just like your cortisol, circadian rhythm, okay? We'll go into that. A single target cell may be influenced by more than one hormone. The same chemical messenger may be either a hormone or a neurotransmitter. Some organs are exclusively endocrine in function. They specialize in hormone secretion alone, the anterior pituitary being an example, whereas other organs of the endocrine system perform non-endocrine functions in addition to secreting hormones like your testes. Male reproductive. Mechanisms of hormone action continued. Response depends on both hormone and target cell. Lipid-soluble hormones bind to receptors inside target cells. Water-soluble hormones bind to receptors on the plasma membrane, activates second messenger system, and there is amplification of original small signal. Alas 12 na dito sa amin. G-protein link hormone receptors. Many hormones activate receptors that indirectly regulate the activity of target proteins. Example, enzymes or ion channels by coupling with groups of cell membrane proteins called your heterotrimeric GTP binding protein, your G protein. We will have a review on this. You remember this in your cell membrane? We discussed this before. This one in your cell membrane, diba? This is your receptor, and then when the hormone comes, your beta, alpha, and delta will separate, and the hormone will bind with your A, alpha. So activation. Second messenger systems include your adenylate cyclase, guanylate cyclase, calcium and calmodulin phospholipase C, which calcium and calmodulin and phospholipase C, which catalyzes phosphoinositide turnover, producing inositol phosphates and diacylglycerol. Your adenylate cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP. Okay, your guanylate cyclase converts GMP to cyclic GMP, guanosine monophosphate. Okay. Then adenylate cyclase second messenger hormone binds to receptors. GDP is released from G protein. Activate adenylate cyclase, which converts ATP to cyclic AMP. Cyclic AMP activates tyrosine kinase A. And tyrosine kinase A phosphorylate specific protein for physiological action. Your inositol triphosphate hormone binds to the receptor. The phospholipase C liberates diacylglycerol and inositol triphosphate. Inositol triphosphate mobilizes calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. Calcium and diacylglycerol activates tyrosine kinase C. Then tyrosine kinase C phosphorylates specific protein for physiological action. Calcium calmodulin, second messenger. Hormone binds to the receptor. Open calcium channels and release calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum. Calcium binds to calmodulin to produce physiological action. Sequence of steroid hormone action. Endocrine gland secretes steroid hormone diffuses through target cell membrane and enters cytoplasm or nucleus. Hormone combines with a receptor molecule in the cytoplasm or nucleus. Steroid hormone receptor complex binds to DNA and promotes transcription of messenger RNA. Messenger RNA goes back to the cytoplasm and directs protein synthesis. So newly synthesized, that is transcription. The process is transcription, okay? Newly synthesized proteins produce the steroid hormone effect. Tapos na yan. signal transduction pathways used by major hormones. So you have your cyclic AMP, inositol triphosphate, and diacylglycerol, and phosphokinase C, and then tyrosine kinase. And you have your JAK-STAT, then hormone response elements on DNA. Okay? You try to go over this. You have your receptor type involved with the following transduction pathway. Okay? For example, cyclic AMP, phosphokinase A. Receptor type involved is G protein coupled receptor on the surface membrane. Okay. And then the outcome alters pre-existing designated protein. And these are the following hormones that uses this pathway. Marami sila, di ba? But you notice with your JAK-STAT pathway, you only have two, growth hormone and prolactin. So you better watch out on this. Kasi favorite question ito, growth hormone and prolactin, the JAK-STAT pathway, okay? Watch out. You have to be vigilant. You have chemical summary of the chemical structure, synthesis, and transport of proteins. Okay, you go over this. And then regulation of hormone secretion. Negative feedback, the most commonly applied principle of feedback for regulating hormone secretion. It is self-limiting. Confers stability by keeping physiological parameters. Just like your blood sugar, your insulin, two types of negative feedback loop. Physiological response-driven feedback loop, and example, blood glucose. If you have blood calcium and phosphate levels in your parathyroid and kidneys, because your parathyroid regulates calcium. Blood osmolarity and volume is example of physiological response. Hypothalamus and posterior pituitary. We will go over these things one by one. Sodium, potassium into your different endocrine organs. Sodium, potassium, and hydrogen in the zona glomerulosa of your adrenal cortex and atrial cells of the heart. Okay, example of physiological response-driven feedback is increase in blood glucose. This simulates insulin secretion, right? Insulin causes increased utilization of glucose by the cells and decreased gluconeogenesis in the liver. This leads to a decrease in blood glucose level. The decrease in blood glucose signals the pancreas to decrease insulin secretion. That is physiological response. Endocrine axis-driven feedback loop. Most endocrine glands are organized this way. This involves a three-tiered configuration. First, the hypothalamic neuroendocrine neurons that secrete releasing hormones. Then, the releasing hormones stimulate or, in a few cases, inhibit production and secretion of tropic hormones from the pituitary. Then, tropic hormones stimulate the production and secretion of hormone from the peripheral endocrine glands. This is the most common. from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the target endocrine gland. Okay? A hormone that has as its primary function the regulation of hormone secretion by another endocrine gland is classified functionally as a tropic hormone. Nourishing means nourishing. This is an example of your thyroid stimulating hormone and your adrenal corticotropic hormone. This is an example of your parathyroid, of negative feedback. We will go into that deeper when we take up the parathyroid gland. Peripherally produced hormones such as the thyroid, cortisol, and sex steroid hormones, your insulin-like growth factor 1, have typically pleiotropic actions, multiple effects on numerous cell types. Positive feedback. When you say positive feedback, or for example, hormone X has biological action that directly or indirectly increase the component of Y. The increase of component Y causes additional secretion of hormone X. This effect is explosive. In this feedback loop, something has got to give way. Example, the surge of LH prior to ovulation is a result of positive feedback of estrogen on the anterior pituitary. LH acts on the ovaries and causes more secretion of estrogen, which eventually cause rupture of the mature ovarian follicle. We will discuss this further when we go to the female reproductive. Circadian rhythm, suprachiasmatic nucleus from the hypothalamus impose a daily rhythm on the secretion of hypothalamic releasing hormones such that they demonstrate a peak of electrical activity at the same time every 24 to 25 hours. So there is a, low level and high level. This is your circadian rhythm. We'll discuss about that some more when we go to the adrenals. Neural input starts from light-sensitive retinal cells, different from the rods and cones. The signal passes via the retino-hypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The pineal gland close to the hypothalamus forms a neuroendocrine link between the suprachiasmatic nucleus and physiological processes that need circadian control by synthesis of the melatonin from serotonin, which is also derived from tryptophan. Okay. Stress, either systemic or hemorrhagic or processive stress, can override the circadian clock. That's why usually patients cannot sleep after a major surgery in the evening if it is done in the afternoon. Because of this, it can override the stress from surgery, can override the circadian clock. So instead of, I will discuss some more about that when we go to the cortisol. Mobilize endogenous fuels such as glucose and free fatty acids to increase delivery to the critical organs. In contrast, growth and reproductive processes are suppressed. Now, you answer this, okay? Which form of diabetes would result in up and down regulation of insulin receptors? Up and down regulation. Why? To allow cells the ability to control the extent of signal pathway. Effect depends on the concentration signal in the ECF, the needs of the cell, Downregulation versus desensitization. Downregulation is slower. A cell needs to remove receptors from the membrane. Whereas when you say desensitization, it is quicker because you only have to deactivate a receptor by adding an ingredient. Inactivation of some of the receptor molecules, inactivation of some of the intracellular protein signaling molecules. Downregulation can occur as a result of temporary sequestration of the receptors at the inside of the cell, or destruction of receptors by lysosomes after they are internalized, or decreased production of receptors. What else? When the process has to stop. When enzymatic degradation of ligands. Removal of ligand by reuptake. Endocytosis of receptor ligand complex. Why do we care about this process? Why? Because of disease and disorders. Now, here are the different diseases. You go over this, and later we will have another, perhaps in June or before the semestral, before the semester will end. We will have another reporting like just we did before, so that you will have a credit for your laboratory. And this time, endocrine disorders. So 10 groups. It is still a group report. Now, Bordetella pertussis. Bordetella pertussis is cause of whooping cough, okay? Cholera toxin blocks enzyme activity of your G proteins. So there is diarrhea. Okay. Okay.